I think that was the best episode ever.
Welcome to 33 Tangents, a roundtable discussion covering a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Your hosts, Jason Thompson, John Naran, Jen Coons, and myself, Jim Driscoll, all live in different areas of the world but work together in the same company. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others. Hey, what's going on?
My ghetto mic stand has finally broken. I might need to buy a fancy, nice one like yours.
Go for it.
My arm thing, whatever.
Mm-hmm. The boom.
The boom.
Yeah. I'm telling you, this thing's great. It kind of hangs down, and some of those client calls I use the webcam for. It's a conversation starter because sometimes it's a wide shot and they can see the mic and the pop guard.
What brand did you purchase?
It's the Yeti.
Oh, the Yeti boom
Well,
arm.
I'm sorry about the company's the blue. It's the Compass, the Compass boom arm.
Yeah, this one was like $10, and it wasn't meant to work with the Yeti, so I've kind of rigged it together.
Yeah, like it was the big gift Suzanne got me for Christmas. Like as Christmas getting closer, like, she's like, "What do you want? What do you want?" I'm like, honestly, I want a really nice boom arm for the mic.
Yeah,
and it's great because it's also made it easier where I use the mic to for conference calls. So like clients have mentioned how like they hear like the sound quality on their end is much better because of the mic.
Nice. All right, I see it.
I can't participate in this conversation because I'm just using a headset on this podcast where you guys have these professional setups.
And it sounds just as good. Although I've got quite a bit of feedback from people who have asked about our setup because the quality they say is very high.
Is it the quality on my voice or your voice?
I mean, they didn't
or the
stipulate. They just in general, like what are you guys? What's your setup? Because the quality of it sounds a lot higher than most podcasts I listen to. So I don't know what podcast they're listening to. I'm sure it's nothing from NPR because we're not that level quality. But
so if you followed up with this person and
that's been a couple of people,
out...
by the way. It's just not one person.
But if they said maybe it was the quality of my voice.
Then it throws everything out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would feel really bad.
Well, what was it? A couple weeks ago, the recording tool. I didn't realize I had selected the Yeti mic as the microphone, and then I used the Beats as just as the for the audio. It switched over and switched everything to the Beats, including the microphone, and then I hit record and I didn't see that. And then when I was going to actually edit it and listening back, I'm like, man, like something's wrong with my mic. And it was because of that. So like I like check like 3 different times before I hit record now to make sure it's got the Yeti instead of the Beats for the microphone.
Yeah.
But speaking of headsets, John, I was really hoping that you were going to call in from the beach today for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen some of those pictures.
Yeah, I spent last weekend on a very desolate island, which was nice. But that said, I don't even know if they would have had Wi-Fi that would have been reliable out there. So it would have been very choppy. But I'm back to the city.
How do you pronounce it?
Wait, what? The island?
The island.
The name is Ga Good. Yeah. Okay. Ga means like totally it's island in Thai. But I mean, people say it all different ways. Yeah.
That sounds horrible.
I was looking at the pictures and like there was nobody around, and I'm like, oh, that's paradise.
Yeah, there was it was kind of a hassle to get to. I mean, it was like an 8-9 hour journey door to door. bus for hours, a ferry, that kind of thing. Um, but it's yeah, there's really it was a lot larger the island than I was expecting. And there's a variety of small hotels there, but the hotels were very bare bones. Although they were like kind of a simple room that was like a bungalow on the beach, but
Oh,
very very simple, not like a luxurious thing at all. And then besides that, there was just really nothing to do. There were some kayaks available to rent, but outside of
That
that,
that
there
that
was
sounds
nobody.
that sounds absolutely amazing. Continuing on my trend of getting really addicted to people's content on YouTube for things that I don't do. So starting very early, I was a follower of Gary Vaynerchuk's Wine Library TV from like the very early episodes, and I don't drink wine. But I would watch those religiously.
Hmm.
And over the years, I've developed an addiction to lots of content on things I don't do. One of my current ones is I follow a guy on YouTube called Stevo One Canivo. He's a pilot,
Hmm.
and he flies a lot of routes from like southern United States down into the Bahamas. And he has his plane set up with all these GoPros, and he talks about the logistics and specifics of flight, which I'm never going to be a pilot, but I still find it fascinating to watch. But anyway, to your island story, he's landing in all these tiny little islands where you could literally walk across it in 20 minutes. And it has a couple of houses on it, and it's got a landing strip, and there's nothing to do there, just but hang out in isolation. I'm like, this looks like the most amazing thing ever.
Yeah, no, the
You
places
know?
like that do exist. That's really
Oh,
that's
and
really cool.
yeah. I've seen him fly into probably 10, 15 different one of them, and he's like, that's just, a tiny percentage. When he's flying over the Bahamas, you see these tiny little islands just everywhere out there. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this looks amazing. One day.
I did read at one point where, oh boy, I'm forgetting where, but in Canada, you can buy. There's a lot of islands for sale to have your own private island, and they're very affordable. And I mean, like in the thousands of dollars kinds of range. But
Like
the
in lakes or like on the ocean.
on the see, I'm forgetting exactly what region of Canada it was, but I'm sure I remember this huge Reddit thread on um, the pros and cons of buying your own island, basically, and it was about this region. Because the land was so cheap, but the catch was there was literally no infrastructure. I mean, you'd have to
Yeah.
wire your own electricity, like, figure everything out.
So that's probably a whole different conversation, and I don't think people think about the total cost of ownership of that. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah, I can buy the land. That's actually affordable. It's everything
exactly.
else. So, just a quick aside story. So some of you may know that I've got a cabin up in the mountains here in Utah. The quick backstory on that is my grandpa in like 1948, along with a couple friends, bought a canyon. And it was 620 acres, and they pulled their money together. And I think my grandpa's investment was like $3,000 or $4,000, which I'm sure is a tremendous amount of money in 1948. I don't know, but they bought this entire canyon, and I've always had dreams of like I want to buy everyone else out and own this whole canyon. But then I look at it, and there was nothing there. And that group of people kind of have handed it down to their children and their children's children, and we've had to do everything, build the roads, um, get the electricity in there. We had to build a water tank that captures water from a spring. We had to run water lines down to all the cabins, and like everything that you would think of a city doing, like you're responsible for all of that. So the land becomes super super cheap. It's making it livable is really really expensive.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really interesting story. What a treat, actually. Because
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I knew about your cabin forever, but I never knew that backstory around the canyon.
yeah, I didn't know those details either.
Yeah, the quick backstory on this, and I'm sure people are like, "Can you guys just get to the damn topic already?"
No, they're
So
like, stay on this.
so I don't know why. I wish I would have asked my grandpa to go into more detail, but what I've gathered is that him and his friends wanted to be like Western Americans that go out and go hunting and do like the Western thing. They wanted to be a cowboy, you know, and they wanted to go deer hunting. And I don't know the kind of climate and landscape in the 40s, but my sense is that Italian Americans were not looked on all too favorably. And they weren't really invited to go hang out with the rest of the white trash hillbillies that went up into the hills and went deer hunting. And they felt really isolated. They wanted to be part of that group. And so, they started kind of going off together, and they stumbled across this canyon and ended up buying it, and they made it into their like private hunting reserve. They built really, really, what's the right word to say? It's got to sound better than cheap. Really, I don't know.
Value oriented.
They built some small hunting cabins out of cinder block, and the wives would go up there and cook polenta and cook, you know, some warm food while the boys were out in the hills hunting deer, and they'd come back and have their little hunting lodge there. And that was kind of the beginning of the canyon, and that led into me getting the land and building our cabin. So it does have a really cool backstory behind it.
Wow.
So there you go.
Feel free to leave a
that's really
comment
cool.
if you'd like Jason to just continue with these stories, because they're really good.
Yeah. And I can segue that, and we can use the beach to segue that as well. One of the things
That was the
that
plan.
one of the things that and I may be embarrassed to even admit this, but when I'm home, I love reading nonfiction. Just like I love watching documentary film, but there's something weird that happens when I go into the mountains. When I go to the cabin, and my grandpa and I, before he passed away, ended up collecting every Louis L'Amour book ever written and published, even the ones that he wrote under a pseudonym. So I have a library up there of all of these Louis L'Amour books, and they're cheesy. And some of them are just bad, but I don't know what it is about that environment, but I just love reading those old kind of spaghetti Western type books when I'm up there. And it's not something I would typically read when I'm at home. So there's your segue, Jim.
Yeah. I go back and forth between like fiction, nonfiction. I love like reading sports books, so like athlete memoirs. Those are always a lot of fun. But yeah, like this was a topic we'd kind of just thrown on the list to cover at some point as we got closer to summer. And then when I saw John's pictures over the weekend, I'm like, that's what we're going to talk about. Because you know, like during the winter, I always kind of get out of the habit of reading, but as soon as the summer comes around, and chances are this is going to be really the last summer for a little while where I actually be able to just sit on the beach and read. That being said, you know, I kind of wanted to talk about like, you know, what's on our summer reading list for this year, you know, and again, that doesn't need to be that specific. You know, I'll also kind of cover some, you know, recent books that we've read. This is some of the feedback we've gotten recently. I think Jason, you also mentioned this on the last one is you know, while, you know, our space, the, you know, 33 Sticks is focused in analytics, you know, a lot of the popular episodes focus on stuff in just general business, general technology. So this is the time of year they start planning vacations, they start planning to have reading material with them. You know, what are some of the books that we've either read recently that we'd recommend to somebody else, or what are the books that we have on our list to read in the coming weeks and months?
I will give you my current list that I plan to get through this summer, and I'm notoriously bad about. What are you doing?
Sorry, I was just taking a photo of the screen. I didn't mean to distract everyone.
I don't know what's going on here. I'm suspicious of everything now.
No, I didn't have to photo. I meant to do that very seamlessly, but it interrupted the entire episode, so I apologize.
And I'm not editing this out.
I'm notoriously bad about starting lots of books and not so good at finishing lots of books. So I have 4 that I've kind of cracked into that I'd like to finish reading. So I'm reading The Laws of Human Nature as a recommendation from Evan Lapointe. It's really, really heavy, so I'm struggling with that one. It's really good content, but really, really heavy. Jen, when we were at Adobe Summit, brought me The Signal and the Noise from Nate Silver, which I've been reading and I'm finding really, really interesting. But it's a pretty heavy read as well, not something you can just sit down and crank through. Um, I like to read The Tipping Point from Malcolm Gladwell. I just finished David and Goliath, which I really, really enjoyed. And so I picked up The Tipping Point, which I'd like to read. And then because I've been such a fan of Yvon Chouinard, and I've probably been posting way too many of his feel-good hippie quotes. But I just, as some of you may know, I'm a huge fan of Patagonia and their business philosophies. I picked up "Let My People Go Surfing" from Yvon Chouinard, and also picked up, I'll have to go find it, a hardcover book from him that's like more of a biography that I'm looking through. So I'm actually actively reading "Let My People Go Surfing" right now, and it's, for me, it's just it makes me feel good. It's like someone out there is running a business the way they want to run it, and it's an amazing read so far.
Nice. With all of your talk and quotes around Yvon Chouinard, I did put "Let My People Go Surfing" on the list, so I'm going to tackle that, at some point this summer. So I'm going to read that one as well.
Yeah, that one
Yeah,
looked
that'd be
interesting
awesome.
to me too.
Yeah,
Actually,
and John, I saw your was it on Instagram or was it on our internal Slack? You started reading Thirst.
yeah. And this is a book that Jason heavily promoted, and actually, my copy is from you from when I mentioned it on Twitter. I don't know if you remember that
I do
from
remember.
months ago.
Yeah, I
Um,
sent 5 or 6 people a copy of it.
yeah, so I'm just reading. And honestly, yeah, it was actually when I was at that island. I sat down and read like 100 pages all in one go, which is a good chunk for me at a time. Um, but yeah, it's a really interesting story. It's Scott Harrison's story about the just his journey to founding Charity Water, and it's really a quite a fascinating read. So
It is.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a very
um,
inspirational read. And you guys may remember or may not, but I also read it when I was on quote vacation in San Diego, and we recorded a podcast, and I was up on the roof, top deck, reading Thirst, and took a break to record one of our podcast episodes. So
Yep, you could hear the what do we call it, the like the air conditioner in the
yeah, the air
background.
conditioner chirping in the background.
That was great. It added to the ambiance to that episode.
I actually brought some props since I actually at another part of the transition. I recently transitioned back to real books from using a Kindle for a while. Actually, I don't know. Somehow I love the Kindle, which is how I was reading for a long time. But I kind
Yeah,
of just felt having it sounds weird, but not just holding the book. I mean, honestly, it was just seeing it on your bookshelf after you read it. I feel like was kind of cool
yeah. I want
for me.
both.
Yeah,
Um,
like
yeah,
like
because
it almost the book is a trophy or something.
it is, and I'll take a picture of my bookshelf. I have a pretty good sized bookshelf in my office here, and I've created a shelf for like all the books I've read this year, lined
Yeah.
up because it's kind of like that's my accomplishment. Um, but yeah, I used to read pretty heavily on the Kindle, and I haven't for many many years. I just love the feel of the book, but I've been going back through my notes. Because it's integrated with Goodreads, and I can go back through all of the notes and highlights I took on my Kindle in Goodreads, and I'm like, this is awesome. So you may have seen me on social posting a lot of quotes from the Consulting Bible. That's because I stumbled across all of my notes that I had taken and highlights I had done in the Kindle in Goodreads. I'm like, there's some good stuff in here, and I there's no way I'll take a highlight or two to one of my actual books. I just won't do it. It's
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
anyway.
But yeah, so I did want to tell you about two books I recently read that I really enjoyed, and I can show them to you on the camera. The first one is Factfulness by Hans Rosling. Uh, if you don't know him, he has some great TED Talks where he uses animated bubble charts, which sounds very complicated, but he does it to show a lot of positive trends that are happening around the world. Um, and what this book is basically about is um, how when you talk to many people, they say the world's getting worse. When you compare it to the old days, like it's getting more dangerous. People are dying sooner. All kinds of different dimensions. But what his argument is that that's completely incorrect on almost every measure, and the world has actually consistently been getting better in almost every measurement as time goes on.
Say the name
Uh,
of the book again, because I
Factfulness.
Factfulness. Okay,
Factfulness. Yeah, and
I'm gonna
it's
add that
it's
to
it's
my
a
list.
pretty quick. It's not a super dense read. I actually originally saw it on Bill Gates's reading list, and actually his critique of it is on the top. One of the most important books I've ever read. So I don't know. That kind of sold me. so so it's broken out into chapters, and every chapter goes through a different type of psychological bias that people have, whether you're everyday folk or like a Nobel Prize winner, on how you perceive uh, the facts in many cases. So it's I agree that it really altered my worldview on many things.
No, that's amazing. I am so bad at buying books, and every time like someone recommends or I see something, I like instantly go to Amazon because I can have it in 2 days. And now I have a backlog of like 80 books I need to read. I'm so bad at doing that, but
There's
that
a
sounds
word
like
for that.
is there
I mean, it sounds so cliche, but
lazy?
there's like it's one of those things where there's a Japanese word for some
Hmm.
exact thing. And boy, one of us will Google it during the course of this podcast, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
Okay,
Sorry, but yeah, the idea of
Jim's gonna
building
go
up
find it.
books before you're able to actually read them.
So when Jim finds that term, that's me. But no, I love that idea, and I think it's something anecdotally that we've heard and we feel, but for whatever reason, I don't know if is it religion, is it news? Like there's some power out there that forces the negative worldview to
Hmm.
sell something that they're selling. Um, but if you take a step back and logically look at it, I think a lot of times the narrative is wrong. Jim found it. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that.
I think it's pronounced Sundioko.
Okay.
Sundioku. Yeah.
There you go. Thanks, Jim. That's me. I hope Jim didn't send me some Japanese word that's like means something completely different than I think it is, and Jim's playing a joke on me.
Yeah.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, no, so I really recommend that one. The other book that I recently read that I loved, which is kind of dense, but it's an amazing story, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And this brief history is, 500 pages, but it is amazing like the the scope of the story that it is. It's basically the story of humans from evolution all the way to modern day. And he does it in like a very narrative type of story, which is I don't know. I think like encompassing all of the civilization's history from every side, like in one story. It's like he's just a very extremely knowledgeable master storyteller. So for that reason, it's just like kind of a it's like watching a movie of everything that ever happened on Earth. Like that's how I would describe it.
That's amazing. So I have two questions now, but it also reminded me I do want to reread since you mentioned Bill Gates. It's been I can't remember when this was published when I first read it. I want to say sometime in the 90s. Is The Road Ahead.
Hmm.
Um, I want to go back and reread that and see how things aligned with what he was talking about back then. And I think if I
Hmm.
remember right, it was a pretty quick read. So, side note. So, the two questions, and I think I've already forgot one of them. Oh, no, I remember both of them. So, one, I'm interested in do you have some kind of a reading schedule that you like to stick to? Is it more whenever you're in the mood? Um, and the second question would be you always seem to come up with some really interesting um, books or movies or things that are not really in the mainstream, and I'm wondering where you're getting your recommendations from.
So the books thing is interesting, where I get the recommendations from, because actually, just in my day-to-day life, I find myself walking by bookstores often, and I actually just physically go into bookstores quite a lot, and just I'm one of those people who just like skims all the books that are featured out there, or like looking at the shelves. Just when it's just very interesting to me, and I do that with a lot more books than I actually end up reading. But
Mm,
um, and I feel, yeah. So I'll a lot of times just get, just find books that look interesting from that point of view. And then I sometimes will look at, like, like Bill Gates's reading list too, which is I feel like he always makes very strong recommendations, and he's also very honest about whether, like, you really need to be super deep into a certain topic to enjoy a certain read. Like, I feel like he's very candid about that aspect of his
mm-hmm.
recommendations, that it helps curate it a little bit for me. But um, yeah, that's usually the way. Unless I hear, and also just hearing people, like yourself or whoever, talk about books as well. But I wouldn't say I like to keep up reading as much as I can, but I'm definitely not one of those people who goes through like a book every week or anything like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to set everyone's expectations incorrectly, but um
But when I'm on my own
uh
private island in Thailand,
yeah.
I do read a book or two. So
But in generally, and thanks to the flexibility of our schedule, though, in terms of when I read, I like to read in the morning, actually, for me,
mm,
which I know is not a luxury for everyone. It's usually the end of the day, but for me, it's kind of like the way I warm up my brain almost in the
sure.
morning. So that's
Okay.
what I do, and sometimes I get more addicted to it
Yeah.
time-wise than others. But I don't set like a block of time, a predetermined block of time, or anything like that.
Got it. Okay. I'm interested in it because I go through peaks and valleys, and I have tried the block of time thing because I've read other people's recommendations that it's a good way to set the habit, and rather than like number of pages or chapters, it's like just read for 20 or 30 minutes. And I've tried that and I've been really good at it. And sometimes I'll go weeks and weeks and weeks, and then I miss a day or two, and then I find it's like been like 2 weeks since I picked up a book. So I struggle with having a daily routine, and maybe that's okay.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too because I go through those periods of being like a very voracious reader, and then just something comes along and everything changes. And yeah, it's been forever since I've read anything. And I remember hearing a few people talk about like what they call like the 52-week challenge, which is to read a book a week. So by the end of the year, you've read 52 books. Now, I don't know if I can necessarily do that, but one of the things I'm trying to get back into the habit of doing, which I was doing for a while, was, toward the end of the night, like John, unlike you, which you start off your day, I would kind of wind down my day by reading for an hour or so. So I'm trying to find a way to integrate that back in for at least 15, 20 minutes. Just reading something and then kind of shutting down the day instead of like ending the day watching TV or something like that. So I'm trying to get back into the habit. I'm hoping with the summer coming around, be able to do that. But one of the books I've recently read now, I mean, I will admit, my wife and I are suckers when it comes to the show Fixer Upper. We love that show. And one of the things is I mean, I get it. It's a TV show, but then they
I
come
think I've
across.
seen one of those books lying around my house that you may mention. Go ahead.
They seem like genuine people. So I read Chip Gaines's book, Capital Gains, um, and in it, he comes across as just a genuine dude, and he gives his story of how he got to where he is. And the subtitle of the book is "Smart Things I've Done by Doing Stupid Stuff." And I mean, he's open about some of the crazy things he did, some of the risks he took, just getting started. And one of the things that I picked up on and kind of resonated with me was he was talking about like when he was in college. He went to Baylor University, but it was like college just wasn't for me. People couldn't wait to get to class, and was sitting in class. He goes, "I'm daydreaming about going out and making money," and he talks about looking outside and seeing the landscaper, and he's like, who's more free? The person who graduates with a 4-year degree and has to go to an office every day, or the guy who's outside cutting the lawn every day and is out in the sun and enjoying, the outside. I'm like, that's an interesting perspective on things. but overall, I thought it was a good book, and again, they come across as just pretty genuine people, and it's fun just hearing the story because everyone looks at them now with like their home decor empire. They're in the process of working with Discovery Network on an entire channel that they're going to produce content for. But he talks about the early days, and even like with the TV show, they really didn't start to get comfortable until like the fourth season of the TV show. And he's also someone that he values his freedom. So he talks about ending the TV show. He's like, we could have kept going, but I started to feel more and more caged by the TV show. I have to wear this shirt. I have to do this. I have to do that. He goes, I don't want to live my life that way. I want to kind of live things on my own terms. And again, I'm paraphrasing a bit. So that's one of the things I definitely enjoyed about that one. So
Yeah.
I mean, for me, that's one I would recommend to just about anybody. I think it's just a good read.
Yeah, very cool. I don't think it's that one, but there's another one sitting around my house that I think I've seen. So, side note, is it weird and creepy that I want John to take the camera and give us a tour of his place?
Not at all.
Okay. He's not on camera right now, so he doesn't know what we're talking about.
No,
so.
not at all.
Okay, cool. All right, welcome back.
So there's that one, but then the next one I have up on my list is actually one, Jason, that you sent me. It's been it's been sitting right over there to read. It's Never Split the Difference. I have to read that one next.
Yeah, that one. I'm going to reread that one because I think I probably picked up about 10% of the techniques that he talks about there, and there's a couple that I use all the time. And I highly recommend that book to anyone, not just people that are in sales. We're all in sales, we're all selling something. And the techniques and the story and just the stories he talks about, just a quick background. He was hostage negotiator. He led a lot of the hostage negotiations for international kidnapping cases. And he talks through different cases, and then he uses those to talk through his techniques for negotiation. It's a fascinating read, and I think there's a lot of really tangible things you can pull out of that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to you reading that and sharing your feedback.
Yep. So that is definitely next on the list, and then just a couple other things to mention. So like I mentioned, Let My People Go Surfing. I added that the other day to the list, and I just bought that. Based on some of the stuff that you've been posting, and then one going back to a recommendation from a while ago, which I started and then put down. I want to pick back up again. Is Why We Buy. John, that was a recommendation from you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I recently saw there was an
Paco Underhill.
Yeah, Paco Underhill, and it's basically. I recently saw that there were. I didn't read it yet, but there was an updated version to the book that I originally recommended, updated for the internet era. I mean. I'm sure it's not updated to the minute, but at least within the last few years, because the original book predated any online behavior.
But still very, very relevant.
Yeah, definitely. Again, that book was all about he basically studied the way people shop in retail environments, and going from physical stores to techniques that he was making recommendations to retailers on how to design stores to better optimize shopping experiences or optimize revenue for the store, I should say.
Yeah, it's a really cool read. I picked it up on Audible after John, I think, recommended it and listened to it. It's fascinating to hear him talk about physically being in the store, tracking things that we do in the digital world, thinking through like entering the store, going to a product detail page, picking up a product, adding it to the cart. I'm like, this is so fascinating that he's drawing this whole kind of purchase funnel in the store. And this was this was back in I can't remember when he first started doing this, but this was a good time ago.
Yeah. And I mean, I've talked to people. I'm like, the grocery store, like things aren't where they are by accident. And I'm not just talking about like the soda is all in this aisle and stacked this way. No, like, I mean, products that you don't think are necessarily related are all still together because at a deeper level they are, or it triggers some kind of purchase pattern. Like
Yeah.
they say, like if you're trying to eat better, stay out of the center of the grocery store. Well, first, don't go shopping hungry, but stay to the perimeter of the grocery store. That's where your meats, veggies, stuff that is not just loaded with sugar typically are. All of the unhealthy, the junk food, the snacks, candy, all of that is toward the center of the store. That's a common little trick.
Yeah.
My other,
There's
I
Oh,
was
go
going to
ahead,
say
John.
my other favorite along those lines in terms of how they do the merchandising is items that people are most likely to go to the store to the a supermarket to buy are, I think, eggs and milk. So
Mm-hmm.
those are always in the back of the store, never in the front, because the it will drive the most people to walk through an aisle where they will likely purchase something else. So it's a
Yeah.
way to increase their average basket size, basically.
Yeah. And another good one too is about every year they completely switch up where everything is.
Mm.
And I've talked to like friends and family who are like, oh, they changed everything around. I don't know where anything's at. I'm like, it's on purpose because
Hmm.
you develop your pattern. Like when I go grocery shopping, I know the exact route I want to take, so I get exactly what I can get and get out. Like I mean, like I've done like a grocery trip like for several things we need like in 15 minutes because I know the exact route to go through, so I'm not constantly backtracking and I'm not distracted. They change everything around, which means you have to plan a whole new route through the store. So again, then something catches your eye that you weren't necessarily planning on buying.
They
Yeah.
do it for people like you, basically.
Exactly, and that's
Yeah.
why I
Jim
recognize why
is
they
the
do it.
reason you should be mad that they switch up your grocery store.
No, I
Maybe it
no,
was specifically just you that they did it for.
um, no, I mean the reason why I recognize why they do it is because of that exact reason. I am trying to. I don't go shopping. I go buying. I have a list on what I'm going to buy, and that's exactly what I'm getting. Um, and I know the exact route I'm going to take through it. It's my OCD. What can I say? So yeah, when they change it up, I'm like, yeah, it's because of people like me that don't buy more than they planned because they know they have their list, they know the route, and they just walk with blinders on.
That's because grocery
Yeah.
stores make like 1 cent on the dollar. And any loss is going to take away from that. So they need all that upsells, Jim. You're making it so they can't be profitable. You got to buy that stuff.
It's actually the downfall of the entire industry. No.
Is me, just one person.
There's a
It led the
fascinating
way to Amazon buying.
there's a fascinating documentary that I wish I could find online. I've been looking for it for years. I want to say I first saw it on the History Channel. It's like a 30-minute mini documentary with the guy that designed the first convenience stores, and he talks through his strategy on why he put certain things in certain places in the convenience store. Very similar to the grocery store. It was such a fascinating watch. I think it was on the History Channel. And have never been able to find like a bootleg copy online, but I know it's out there. I'm gonna keep searching. If I find it, I'll share it.
I must
So
have, this, I'm sorry,
go
I keep
ahead.
interrupting you,
No,
but
no, go ahead.
I'm like this conversation is really reminding me of why I got excited about analytics in the first place. To be honest, so,
Agreed.
kind of fun.
And it is such a fascinating topic that we're all exposed to, and a lot of times we just don't realize it. So speaking of that, I'm interested if either of you have any kind of analytics related books on your summer reading list, and this is a question I get asked all the time, and people are often surprised at my answer. What book or books do you recommend to someone that is in the analytics space?
Ooh, I have a good one, but I'm looking up the exact title because I don't have it in front of me. Sorry, I don't want to misspeak to it. Yes, I just recently actually read this book, which uh, it's an O'Reilly book of creating a data-driven organization. Practical advice from the trenches is the title. And I almost don't want to say it because anyone who reads and really um, absorbs this book will be able to do whatever we do. I think at the same level or beyond. So
So I disagree. And there's a fascinating conversation in the culinary world about a similar subject about
no,
top chefs that write
yeah.
cookbooks and those that don't. And those that do have the overwhelming belief that the recipes aren't what makes them what they are.
True. That's a very valid point. Yes.
Okay.
But yeah, well, so that aside, the content is very interesting for anyone who uh, is involved in an organization that wants to work towards ways of making the strategy more of a data-driven one. Just it talks about that kind of what's involved in that migration, evolution.
Give me the title one more time. I'm gonna throw it on my Amazon list.
Uh, Creating a data-driven organization. It's an O'Reilly book.
Yep.
It's by
Yep, I
Carl
see it.
Anderson. So yeah, and Carl Anderson was I'm not sure if he currently is still, but he was the director of data science for Warby Parker, basically.
Ah, okay.
So it's pretty, relatively relevant, modern in our industry. So
Not a lot of reviews. There's not a lot of people that like reading the nerdy books that we like to read.
always the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Jim, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like I don't necessarily have like any industry
No,
related
it doesn't need to
books.
be industry related,
Yeah.
just analytics related.
Yeah, like I mean, even analytics related too. Like I honestly, I really don't. A lot of the books have been like bios that kind of jump out. Like this is going to sound like I don't have a good way of putting this, but like again, like going back to what I started with is, I love reading books written by athletes.
Hmm.
And because you pick up little things that they did to get to an elite level. So Nick Foles, who he was the quarterback that won the Super Bowl for the Eagles 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. He's now with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He wrote a book afterwards, and his book was about adversity. He was drafted by the Eagles and played really well. I just, I always thought he was a great quarterback, but got traded just because he got caught up in organizational changes and coaching changes. He got caught up in that and got traded, but then came back, and he had to kind of swallow his pride because he came back as a backup, but then got his chance to to play, and took them, and they won the Super Bowl. So just reading how he kept his ego in check, just little traits like that, the things like you can apply just generally throughout life. Another book I've read, about a baseball player, he literally got one at bat and got hit in the head with a ball. And again, how his approach, but then how did he ultimately get to that point? Because I mean, he had just gotten called up, and how did he become like a top draft pick to a top prospect? Was he was talking about like his training regimen before he got hurt, and just the repetition again. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer when it comes to analytics books. I try to pick, I have this habit of just picking up general life skills that I'm able to transition into what we do.
Yeah.
The repetition, the organization, and honestly, again, the Nick Foles book I thought was great because it just talks about dealing with adversity and dealing with organizational changes, and like not not getting too down on yourself, because I mean he was about to quit the NFL altogether after some of the things that happened.
I dig it. My my recommendation, whenever I'm asked what is the most important book you've ever read, that applies to being an analyst, is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And people are like, "What?" And I'm like, it's the book that I read, that got me interested in analytics and thinking analytically. And I have probably read it 7 or 8 times now, and it's probably one of my top 3 books of all time. And I don't know if you guys reread books or anything, but what I've found is that it's never the same. Depending on where I'm at in my life or the experience I've added, the next time I read it, I get something completely different out of it. But it was such a good book to think about things analytically and how to think about things in a structured manner. So it's the number one book I always recommend when I'm asked like what's your top analytics book. It's that one.
Oh, it should be. We should have a 33 sticks like orientation, onboarding package with this book.
And send a copy. I did send a copy to Hilab probably 8 or 9 years ago. And when she was reading it, she was taking it with her everywhere she went. And I can't remember where she was one time, but she got comments from it in a couple places. And then maybe people should listen to my recommendations.
Yeah.
I recommended Choke to her, Chuck Palahniuk, who I'm a huge fan of, and he's creepy and eerie and all sorts of weird shit. So he wrote Fight Club, if you're not familiar with any of his other work. But he wrote a book called Survivor. I recommended Survivor to her, and she's been reading that and been dragging it around. I think she was at UCLA Medical Center or something, and one of the surgeons, her son broke his jaw skateboarding, and they were kind of doing a follow-up at UCLA, and I think the surgeon or something noticed she was reading that book. He's like, oh, no way, that's amazing. Like, you're reading that? And so they had this bonding moment over it, and she felt really cool. So, apparently I have good book recommendations sometimes. Survivor is if you want a crazy read. Have you guys read any Chuck Palahniuk stuff? He's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of my obsessions that I don't admit too freely, but I'm really into his writing.
This is a really good conversation. I was surprised. I honestly didn't have high expectations for the topic.
Well, I was
always the
expecting this
Demi
one to be a
Downer,
quick
and then
one.
at the end he's like, "Oh, this actually worked out okay."
Yeah, I'm always a late
late adopter on
late believer on these things. But no, I just don't understand how podcasts work, I guess.
No, none of us do. That's why the whole idea of our podcast was like we just get together and talk, and we're like, we should just record this. This is a pod. It's like Seinfeld. What'd you do today? That's an episode.
Yeah.
How's that an episode? It's on TV.
I've been reading the most recent big trend in social media. I think actually came from Gary Vaynerchuk. Like he is where he was saying everything's moving to just true authenticity. It's not about, the size of your net as much as like just being more authentic. So this podcast
all
fits
for
right
that.
into that. Yeah.
No, it is. That was one of our goals. Is we didn't want it to be overly polished and produced. We wanted it to be a reflection of us and really how we work. I mean, that's really central to how we work is authentic. And so trying to overly polish and script a podcast really didn't fit our culture.
Mm-hmm. That's what they're saying, because there's so many people that do seemingly perfect curation nowadays of things that there's really no room there anymore. Where like the new thing that really makes you stand out is just being authentic. It's like just going back to basics.
I like it. I'm a fan. I am a fan. Well, we should do a follow-up where we talk about our favorite films and documentaries.
Yes, I will put that on the list. Let's do that.
And
next
John's going to be like,
that's not going to be a good one.
This topic is not going to work.
It's not going to work at all.
Oh, it's been a few weeks since Endgame came out, so we could possibly mention spoilers. Favorite films and documentaries.
But too soon for Game of Thrones. I don't know.
And like all of the stuff that you guys are talking about, I'm going to be like, I don't have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. But no, that's actually not a bad one. So I'll be able to go through, like the list, because I've got some documentaries every now and then that I'll rewatch on Netflix. And honestly, Jason, there's one, the Slow, which is the train ride in Norway.
Would you be surprised if I told you I've watched it?
I've watched it. I mean, I'll watch it like in 10 or 15-minute increments. Sometimes I put it on the background just as white noise. It is the coolest thing.
It is awesome. It's a real-time train ride between two cities.
It's like 8 hours.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's great because, like, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, the baby just went settle down. And I just put that on TV, so there was just some kind of noise or whatnot. And boom, baby was out, and it was great. So, that's on the list, and I'll make sure we bring that up. So, yeah, let's talk about that next week.
I was going to say, can I make a request to make it a little bit wider and just say Netflix recommendations?
I like it.
Documentary or not.
Yes, let's do it. I think that would be a fun one.
All right, cool. Yeah, because there's some really good stuff in there. Netflix recommendations. All right, perfect. We have our topic
Cool.
for next week.
All right, this has been fun.
This has been a lot of fun. Really good. Cool. So we'll go ahead and wrap up for now, and I will catch you guys later.
Cool. I think that was the best episode ever.
Agreed.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach us, you could do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at www.33sticks.com. The 33 Tangents podcast is a production of 33 Sticks.